I'm Sora Luxon, and this is Magic Lesson number 65, The Often Ignored Power. First, yes, I had my wisdom tooth removed, so all of you who know me and that have been sending me energetic healing and prayer and spell work, and those of you from within my own formalized tradition that worked before, during, and after, I can happily tell you my wisdom tooth is gone. It was the simplest procedure in the world. I was able to do it fully awake, right? So there was no anesthetic. So it was incredibly inexpensive as well, and it healed almost immediately without any problems. So thank you. Proof's in the pudding, magic works. And I just came from moving all the mint from the drying racks because it gets too hot in there sometimes. So I had to find a cooler place to put all of our organic mint. So if I seem a little scattered, that's why I'm half still in the mindset of saving the herbs for best efficacy. We get heat spikes in California sometimes, and it really does matter how hot it gets, kind of like when espresso is burned. It's the same sort of idea. Everything that's in the mint, all of those essential oils, is still there, but they don't work the same when it becomes overheated during the drying process. So it was important to go move it. So I'm still half mentally, cognizantly with the mint racks. The most important thing for what I would call the often ignored power is to say first, like I so often do, taking the time to extend sincere gratitude, the way I extend it right now, to say thank you to all of you who may be listening to this, the people who listen to this little podcast, whether or not they agree with it or like it or even find it useful, but to be thankful for you just for sharing your time, your energy with me. Even if it doesn't seem like a direct correspondence, even if it seems to be this very passive thing that you're partaking in, it really isn't. So thank you. Thank you for existing, for being here, for exploring, for seeking truth. It doesn't matter if our paths ever cross, biologically, physically, or part ways, or if we spiritually journey forward together. Thank you for being you, and for sharing some small part or large part of that experience with me, because it's a choice, and I really do appreciate it. I really thought, when I felt impelled to begin this free little service, this little podcast of shared knowledge and experience of the great craft, right? Whatever small insights I may have, or lessons that I usually share with my own initiates or neophytes, that a handful of seekers out there who perhaps had no other access to this sort of thing would perhaps find in this little podcast, a fellow truth seeker, a place of safety, some commiseration here as we humbly learn from each other, because sometimes people need that. But now there's something like 300 subscribers already, I believe, which is to me incredible, because I was only thinking about the handful of fellow truth seekers who might need this or stumble upon it. So again, this amazing proof that if nothing else, I happened to manage to listen to the right guiding nudge from my higher self when I began this channel. Thank you for sharing your time and energy with me. Thank you for giving me a reason to produce this, for manifesting this shared experience, because you're doing it too. I know I've said it before, but it never ceases to amaze me, having come from the outside in, right? Having been a non-initiate to becoming an occultist, how positive and self-aware the occult community is. It's almost like being raised in a religion. Not that occultism is religion or dogma, but when you're raised inside of something, you can be very blind to the way it functions, versus if you come to it from the outside, you can see what it's like to other outsiders. And as someone who operates multiple businesses, for instance, I can tell you that it is incredible. It's, mind-blowing. It's mesmerizing. The difference between the enthusiasm, the energy, the vibration, the rapport, the authentically genuine appreciation observers of magic instill and cultivate in even their smallest everyday dealings with others, compared to what's often the disengaged, unaware, often casually callous or cruel or oblivious, insecure interactions that have to be navigated and dealing with, individuals of a non-truth seeker mindset. It's night and day. If you're an occultist that knows what it's like on the outside and now you're on the inside, you've seen this. You've seen this difference. The level of energetic proliferation and return given back onto the occultist who is always behaving this way or even just trying to. It's mind-blowing. The health, beauty, spiritual equanimity, the power occultism has, the power these individuals have, internal and external, influenced by choice. Think of the manager on the team. This is the segue into today's lesson, right? What I consider to be this very great ignored power. So think of the manager on a team, say in a company, a small business, a project that people are working on together, that all the assistants, all the team members fight to want to have as their manager, fight to serve, quote unquote, in a sense. You want to be under, that person, that gal or guy, the one that everyone on the team in the company loves best because they're so motivating, they're so inspirational, they're so fun. You can learn so quickly from them, everything just seems to flow. Think of the monk who energetically channels, say, physical power into one thumb and can deflect and redirect what seems an incredibly overpowering amount of exterior force that may be confronting them, in a conflict, in an actual fight. How just coming from a place of balance and positive self-awareness, how this real adept, this monk, of being able to disable or rechannel what seems impossible energetic odds. You see this principle reflected in nature too, what we as occultists have and share within our community, because it's so useful and so empowering. Of course nature's going to take advantage of it. Nature loves to take advantage of things. Nature uses it on behalf of the weak. Think of the wide-eyed, innocent, puppy, kitten, fawn in the forest, who even the hardest, meanest, cruelest soul, hunter, person, other animal melts for, feels compassion for, that authentic balance, internally unnegative, that internal disposition displayed in youth's physical forms, like in infants, like in playful wolf cubs frolicking with each other. Those behaviors of focusing on the good, on appreciating life, being enthusiastically positive about experiences rather than dulled and negative and apathetic. That vital current of babies in any species that disarms and brings out compassion from, energetic resourcing from, the best from the majority of other beings, of entities that it comes into contact with. Nature makes little things alive, cute. Because of that seemingly passive power of having and relishing in the experience of joy, of pure appreciation of just existing. That power provided at birth gives that little thing, whatever it may be, a way better chance at survival. It makes other things want to help it. When we act young, feel young, think young, we are young. There is no difference. When we act prosperous, feel prosperous, think prosperously, think, I have everything. And there's enough for everyone else too. Then we actually do have everything. There is no difference. And no, not just in some silly think happy thought sort of a way, tangibly. Magic is tangible. Magic is very real. It's not just in your head. Entering into powerful aggregates of resource energetically not only introduces you to those pools of power, setting your vibration with them, it also spawns residual returns from that source, from that pool. Like if you jump into a lake, you can walk back out of it without swimming. You can forget all about having just been in the lake. But you're still going to be dripping wet. Your clothes are still going to be wet until the sun dries you again. You carry some of the pool and whatever its element, its effect, back out with you. You do. And then you spread it passively, despite yourself. Tossing yourself willfully into a pool of vibratory, energetic circuit of, say, generosity behaves the same way as that water. I had a fellow initiate recognize an instance of this and share it with me recently. They were telling me how they listened to Joe Rogan's podcast. And sometimes this person, I think he's a IFC, MMA, I don't know. He's a martial artist or combatant, someone who works, to muscle builder, and then they fight, in octagons. But sometimes this person, Joe Rogan, talks about leaving really big tips for waitresses at coffee shops, that type of thing. This is what my friend was telling me. Because he can, and he has his reasons for doing it, and maybe it helps others, it makes him feel good, what have you. And this fellow initiate that was telling me about the Joe Rogan podcast, this guy talking about how he does this, said, I've been listening to this stuff for years. I've been listening to this podcast for years by this guy. And it wasn't until today, because of Magick, that I really got what he was saying. That this man is willfully engaging, like any other occultist, with an aggregate energy, with a source, the energy of generosity. He is spellcasting. He's casting a spell. The currency is the sigil left every time on the table, a symbol mentally made physically manifest to create an intended outcome that not only immediately then serves him, Joe, I guess, and the recipient, say the waitress who receives this $100 unexpected tip. But look at the residual effects after years of this man doing this, how his mindset, at the very least, in this way is so healthy. His outlook so positive, his life, he's like a millionaire, people love him, people aren't jealous of him. He's very popular because he's actively spawning spell work in mind and action. Just like any neophyte scrawling their first charm with chalk on the ground. And all I could respond to this, new initiate, this fellow initiate, was, yeah, I don't know who that is, but anything that makes you feel empowered and of service to others is going to make you powerful and well served. That is magic. And offerings, whether on a piece of paper, in the form of currency with symbols presented, or in some other format, are a magical practice of mental awareness, as old as the bones in the hills. This surprises you? What did you think tips were? Did you think they were a way to cultivate negative energy and returns to yourself? Of course not. If you behave prosperously, you will be prosperous. But this person, he was surprised by it. He shared this experience with me, how he was able to interpret a new insight from something he'd been listening to for years. He was surprised to make this connection. That magic is all in your head, but it also isn't. There is very real magic. It's an actual thing. It's also absolutely not in your head. It's has a very real effect when you employ it systematically in specific ways, say like leaving a very large tip all the time on purpose, that everyone really is working with magic, that it's real. like an invisible force, like gravity. Gravity is real. It's hard to point to, but scientifically, physically, it's incredibly real with a real atom-based effect, an energetic-based effect. And then I asked this person what he thought atoms were made of, and he said energy, and I asked him what he thought energy was, and you can tell where the conversation went from there. It tends to blow people's minds when they actually stop to think about it. We know stress kills. We know that medically. Find me the scientist or doctor who isn't yet willing to admit that the magicians, the monks, the high priestesses have always been right about the emotions, mental states, and physical health being tied together. Go ahead and find that doctor, that scientist, and I'll show you someone who's really behind the times, really bad at their job, hasn't read a medical journal in years, because science acknowledges this now. For the love of Astra, the iWatch acknowledges that breathing mindfully for 60 seconds here and there inside of your day is important for people's health. It's just acknowledged for the entire mammal species of humanity. The iWatch is hilarious to adepts because its practices are happily finally catching up to where sages, magi, and monks were in ancient Egypt. We already knew that you should be stopping to breathe with awareness for 60 seconds then. Talk to a starseed. They'll say, I knew that before I came to this planet. I knew that the first time I opened my eyes and felt the vibratory light structure here, that it could be damaging. Like Facebook, YouTube, and these other platforms are finally listening to that person, to that quote-unquote weirdo occultist or starseed about how bright screens are possibly very bad for people's eyes, right? And now are offering dark screen options at the very least during prolonged audience viewing. Yes, Facebook, yes, YouTube. 1,000 years ago, we could have and did tell everyone that allowing an initiate to sit and stare in a dark space, in a dark contemplative room, in a dark cave, in a darkened temple unit, is far healthier for them biologically and mentally, far better for producing focus, good chemicals, and dissolving mental discord while not harming their retinas, much like any bright light does. We don't make initiates stare endlessly into blazing fires. You sit in a dark room to meditate. Yes, modern science, looking directly into the sun is bad for you. You acknowledged that a long time ago. Thank you for finally admitting that the cumulative effects of specified light spectrums from a screen damage people in much the same way. See, we knew that years ago. We make people stare at darkened spaces, darkened walls. Any Masonic lodge will tell you the same thing. You need a dark temple when you begin. That's where you begin. See, for the occultist, this sort of thing, the obviousness finally being caught up to or acknowledged by the seemingly so self-pronounced, amazingly intelligent, oh, we made you a dark screen for YouTube. Oh, thanks, yeah. The irony, the irrationality, the stance for ignorance while willfully avoiding common sense until it's cheap enough or enforced. It's funny, the lengths we go to avoid ourselves. The spiraling journeys we have to take to come back to the truths we already held. Anyway, back to the main point. Calm people live longer. Happy people are healthier. People who don't stare at bright objects have their eyes last longer. Things like appreciation and joy make us the best possible versions of ourselves. And this is a massive power source. The occultist knows this. It's a power any of us can employ. I would go so far as to say, like in the title of today's Magick lesson, that it may be the single greatest, most ignored power that everyone has access to. People love to ignore being positive can change your life. They hear that and mentally they go, ick, more useless, utter nonsense. They'll stick a label on it, that weirdo, that hippie, whatever. And then they have negative and awful experiences of life. It's because they're negative. It's because they're tractioned in ignorance and refuse to even acknowledge the possibility of an exterior perspective that might be very useful to them. I mean, when you're an adept, or if you begin working with any network of occultists, magic practitioners, any community, a coven of those who bear the light, the illumined, it's just this amazing vibration, this way of willfully working with energy that all of them have of being aware. For example, in online marketing for private retail with social demographic reviews from a customer base, there's this well-known almost law, incontrovertible fact, that the people you're, say, selling a product to, that the public is 89% or something like that, more likely to come back and take the time to write a review on, say, Yelp or something, of any bad experience, or even to complain of a neutral, satisfactory experience when they come back to say anything. When they're pleased, when they're happy with their service, with their product, what have you, there's almost no chance that they'll come back to say anything. So as a business practitioner, you have to learn to be functioning from there. That's the expectation, that people will complain, that the numbers in online marketing show generally no reviews means you're doing something right, because people aren't complaining. And that needs to be your focus when you begin to keep people from complaining. That's where most people's beginning threshold for understanding, say, their consumer base begins, when they begin to study or research these things. That if a person making a purchase isn't bothering to come back and leave a bad review, then that's actually a neutral review or a good review. Because they're far more likely to do that than they are to come back pleased. They don't bother to come back when they're pleased, when they're happy. They take it for granted and they move on to the next thing. Just some insider insight, I've seen marketing research broken down from some of my own private retail companies, for instance, where it does not matter what age, religion, ethnicity, even nationality for international sales, Sweden, Canada, Japan, parts of the European Union, just across the board, the norm socially is that people are far, far more likely to focus on the negative psychologically than the positive. Stop and think about that for a moment, because that's the world you're living in. I can tell you, based on the math, based on the analytics, and it's not completely true across the board. There are specific places and groups where it's a little less true, but generally, it really is true. According to the science, if that's how you think of truth, in the majority of the public sphere, it's just the way it is. Whether you're a restaurateur, a merchandise retailer, a pharmaceutical cosmetic producer of some kind, a suite of administrative professionals that offers a service. I'm trying to think. Say like a tax place, like H&R Block, that chain, which helps people file taxes. That's a retail company that offers an administrative service. For people who don't have the private in-house counsel, the lawyers within their family, the infrastructure to do it themselves for whatever small business or private entity, say, like themselves individually on an individual basis. No matter what the category of interactive social commerce that breeds evaluation and commentary, people in general that are not occultists prefer to spend time complaining about a problem than appreciating or enjoying a positive or pleasant experience. People prefer to share negativity. Statistically, it draws more of their psychologic internal focus, intention awareness, emotional chemicals, emotional state of mind, and that energy projects. It's what someone prefers to share with others, even though they don't realize they're behaving that way. Odd as it may seem, if someone finds a hair in an ice cream sundae after leaving some organic, independent, wonderful, hipster, local creamery, they're 89% more likely to go jump online and leave a rating about that and say something about it than if they go to, say, the same creamery 89 times in a row, have 89 wonderful, pleasant, enjoyable experiences in a row. They're less likely, even once of those 89 times, to stop and say something nice or leave a review of any kind because they didn't have a bad experience. Yeah, this is likely something you already know about if you work in a wide-scale way interactively with the public at all. This is why most people who have to interact with the public at large don't do things like read their Twitter accounts. You likely have some sense of this being how the majority seemingly operates. This is where they're coming from. More likely to yell and curse at a stubbed toe than to mindfully say thank you with gratitude for the endless moments, the years of not having stubbed toes, for every minute they walk healthy and uninjured every day of their lives. They'll never stop for even 1 second to say thank you for that, but they're more than happy to energetically project huge amounts of energy into yelling or cursing if they hurt themselves. We're conditioned very much into a paradigm of humanity that has us brainwashed to think taking what ought to be appreciated for granted is normal, is the healthy way to behave, is expected. It's how everyone does it, feels, acts, thinks. It's so easy to forget and not take a moment to have gratitude for our health, for the sun and the sky, for our own lungs, drawing in breath, our own heart, endlessly, ceaselessly beating this powerful muscular rhythm, giving us movement, momentum, giving this physical vessel, life within the mortal coil where we happen to be stuck right now, right? That's how we're taught to think. It doesn't matter. No one cares about that. Everyone's oblivious. It would be strange if I stopped to notice. People do. Monks do. Monks will thank their own hearts for beating. But that's how we're taught to think, that they're weirdos, and we've been brainwashed to think and be like, no one thanks their eyes for providing the ability to see color. That would be crazy. Other people would think I'm nuts. But everyone knows that you should complain if something goes wrong, or if something's hurting you, or if something's injurious. Stop and think about it. Does that actually make sense? Just rationally, logically, analytically. If you're going to report, say verbally report, on problematic stimulus, wouldn't the same and equal balancing pole, if you're a hermeticist, wouldn't the same and equal function be to also at least report constantly and consistently when you also aren't in pain, when you feel good? At the very least, shouldn't you be reporting when you feel really good? But people don't. Just at minimum, to keep things at neutral for yourself mentally, you should be putting the same amount of energy into one as you are into the other. It's strange, right? The mental slavery we are conditioned into before we have any ability to elaborate or defend ourselves against it, the overwhelming quote-unquote human normative dialogue, psychological framework we're indoctrinated into, is that we should complain when things bother us, but not bother to say anything when things are good. You can ask any Buddhist worth their salt, worth their bronze. They'll tell you, to them, from their perspective, because they're adepts, because they're occultists in their own right, It's irrational. It's psychologically imbalanced. Obviously, it's a mental, spiritual disease. This bizarre, widely accepted, self-harmful bias of automatic reasoning that enslaves the population, that actually makes no sense at all. A Buddhist sees it the way any occultist with the barest comprehension of polarity would begin to see it. If you comprehend balance or actualize self-awareness and can make your own choices, and you start to question norms and decide what your own norm should be for your own self-use and best worth and value, then this mindset, it's actually pretty bizarre. It's pretty nasty. And it's persistently pervasive in the population. Now, on the other hand, I can also tell you from a very real lens of also having an occult community that I engage with. Say, for example, just my Magick shop, the Luxe Occult Supply shop on Etsy, that tiny little Etsy store. It's sort of my temple's love child, all the things we want to make available, but not necessarily to the public at large or en masse, because we couldn't. Even if we wanted to, it's all handmade and it's all blessed, so it would take far too long. Not enough time in 100 lifetimes for that. Anyway, that humble little my love shop, because of its design, or what it's offering, it only really interacts with actual occultists and not with the public at large. Not with anyone is going to come across it. Only witches, wizards, pagans, druids, Freemasons, Hermeticists, Templar Knights, Brujas, High Priests. Only they are looking for things like Thor offering incense, planetary induction incense, holy anointing oils based on ancient grimoire recipe. So it's mostly, almost purely, occult practitioner demographics being served there. And it is mind-blowing, the difference just purely, mathematically, completely statistically, of how many of those individuals at least honor as much or more the intentional focus of returning to review something they enjoy, or like, or appreciate. And they enjoy, like, and appreciate everything. Just statistically, the engagement of what a market analyst would call the consumer is off the charts for that tiny shop. It's sky high. It's incredibly outrageously high when compared to non-occult demographic consumer bases. It really is night and day. It's like two different species of people. I hate to say it that way, but it is. It's actually confusing. It's problematic for normal interpretation, for normal research, because it's so different from what's considered the norm in terms of social customer feedback. It's so out there, removed from that. Like, if there was a bell curve statistically, it's not even on the page. So it becomes almost impossible to define and to compare it to other things. But that's just it. For occultists, that is the norm. They're not on the page. They're not within that bell curve. We have a different makeup psychologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Whether we opted in by raw talent, have always just been different, or took the time to acknowledge that something wasn't quite right with the norms around us, whether it was culturally, socially, religiously, maybe indoctrinated into us in schools, and decided then to train ourselves by free will, free choice, and willpower, intentionally focus to be willfully different in the way we chose to be. We really are different. Not better, not worse. But our experience and the way we evaluate everything around us is not the reality of most other people. Probably most of the people around us on any given day. And this is something we have to be aware of. You start to really come into a comprehension of that the further you go along your training, that you have to be very mindful that most people are not an occultist the way you are, that are not a trained adepts of whatever order, whatever classification, that they're very much living within a very different paradigm still. They're operating from a different reality, a shifted perspective, a shifted internal awareness. We are on a shifted plane of being where we shifted away or just aren't there. We're reading from a different book. Occultists live in a different reality with a very real power that they share among themselves. And what happens when you show this difference, say in the numbers analytically of this sort of thing, say 2 retail stores, of how occultists versus the rest of the population behave, just act out their state of being psychologically different. Like if I show how the magic shop's reviews are, how they're worded, how many of them there are, how people always come back to say something, whether or not they have something good to say, they are going to come back and at least appreciate that something was done in the first place. How well that small shop does, because customers involved with it actually want themselves to be well and do well. And therefore the shop and everything else around them is mindfully acknowledged as being well and being appreciated. How that consumer base behaves. If you show that to business people who are not occultists, the first thing they do is ask to become an occultist when they see what's really going on there. Because who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Who wouldn't want to be on that shifted plane? Of course, you'd rather be operating from there and with those people. Once you realize what it is that's going on there, how beautiful, how divine, how wonderful, and that it's an option, anyone who sees it tends to opt in. You know that adage, if you're walking through hell, keep walking? For the occultist, common sense immediately begs the question, first of all, why are you choosing to walk through hell? Why are you doing that? That just seems like a bad choice. 2 paths diverge in this wood, and you took the one full of broken glass, molten lava, and swarms of flies? Why? The occultist can't help but say, why? We ask. We truth seek. Ignorance is the enemy. We don't just accept blithely what we're told. Why didn't you ever bother to even look at the path right next to that horrible one? Why didn't you look at this other path covered in soft moss, surrounded by beautiful crystalline structures, lighting your way, feeding you energy, filled with hummingbirds that smell like strawberries and soothing waterfalls that make beautiful diaphanous curtains of light? I don't know. Insert whatever nice thing you personally think of as being nice into the nice path description for yourself. Maybe you like funny green demons named Charles who keep you company along the way or something. It doesn't matter. But still, why wouldn't you, strange people, choose that nicer path instead of all the painful glass shards, brimstone nonsense? That's how occultists always think when we see people behaving this way. It sort of seems to us like that was your choice and your first bad decision. That right there, choosing the painful path when there was a better option and you didn't turn your head to see it, or you saw it and ignored it. Occultists can't help but think that to themselves. Why can't you see that you're doing it to yourself? If you're a non-adept, a non-initiate, and not behaving from a place of spiritual awareness or spiritual mindfulness, why are you doing that to yourself? You're hurting you. The second thing that occurs to the occultist, whether it's a Buddhist monk, Templarite, high priestess of an Isis, church, if you're walking through hell, why on holy sacred terra firma would you keep walking that path? No, think about it for a second. Why aren't you looking for an exit? If you are complaining, if you are negative, if this is a horrible experience, if you already are acknowledging that you don't want to do it, Why are you forcing yourself to keep on doing it? Sit down, maybe. Meditate. Who knows? Maybe that quote-unquote hell you believe yourself to be walking in and reporting all the time isn't hell at all. Maybe it'll dissolve around you if you just stop. As your perspective of it changes, broadens, becomes more enlightened. And no, don't be so quick to judge. Don't be so quick to say no and call me a weirdo for saying you should stop and sit down in hell and meditate. Have you ever tried it? Tell me how ridiculous I am for suggesting it after you try it. Because the truth of the matter is that when Buddha was under the Bodhi tree, he was surrounded by demons while being in heaven. That's how this whole thing actually works. The greatest ignored power, the power every adept has. It's there for the taking, friends. The ability to magically change your actual physical reality in real time. Just like Doctor Strange from a Marvel blockbuster movie, with superpowers, tracing mandala in the air, operating actual gateways to other places. That's real. There is an ignored power that can be channeled usefully by you however you wish to. The power to be grateful instead of complain, to focus on the positive instead of the negative, to create the paradigm you want instead of the one you're disagreeing with, to even in your darkest, most laborious, injured, chaotic moments, to be pleased with what's going on, no matter what it is, rather than hateful of it. It's a game changer. If you want to make your life, family, career, relationships, daily experiences, physical self better in any way, stop choosing hell. Put yourself in paradise and watch everything that matters to you thrive. That is the ignored power. Until next time.